Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women in her neighborhood. While most of her friends spent their weekends shopping or at the spa, Sarah could be found at the local shooting range, perfecting her aim with her father's old revolver. The weathered Smith & Wesson had been passed down through 3 generations of her family, and she treated it with the respect it deserved. Living alone in the suburbs of Phoenix had its challenges, but Sarah felt prepared for whatever life might throw her way. Her small ranch-style home sat on a quiet street lined with desert landscaping and retired neighbors who kept to themselves. The area had always been considered safe, which was exactly why Sarah had chosen it after her divorce 2 years earlier. At 34, Sarah worked as a nurse at the local hospital, pulling long shifts that often left her driving home alone in the early hours of the morning. Her ex-husband had always criticized her interest in firearms, calling it unnecessary and dangerous. But now, living independently, she appreciated the confidence that came with knowing she could protect herself if needed. Sarah's daily routine was methodical and careful. Every morning before work, she would check her home security system, ensure her firearm was properly secured in its gun safe, and review the previous night's surveillance footage from her doorbell camera. Her neighbors thought she was perhaps a bit paranoid, but Sarah had learned from her years in the emergency room that danger could strike anyone, anywhere, at any time. The trouble began on a Tuesday evening in late October. Sarah had just finished a particularly difficult shift at the hospital, where she had helped treat 3 victims of a convenience store robbery that had gone wrong. The images of their injuries were still fresh in her mind as she drove through the darkened streets toward home, her hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. As she pulled into her driveway, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. The motion sensor light that usually illuminated her front porch was out, leaving the entrance to her home shrouded in darkness. She made a mental note to replace the bulb the next day, but for now, she used the flashlight on her phone to navigate to her front door. What Sarah didn't notice was the pair of eyes watching her from behind the large oleander bush that separated her property from the vacant lot next door. Marcus Thompson and his younger brother Kevin had been casing the neighborhood for 3 weeks, looking for the perfect target. They had noticed Sarah's routine, her late-night arrivals, and most importantly, they had overheard her conversation with a neighbor about her gun collection during a weekend barbecue. Marcus, 26, had spent the last 5 years in and out of prison for various theft-related crimes. His brother Kevin, just 19, was eager to prove himself in what he saw as the family business. They had heard through their network of criminal contacts that legally owned firearms could be sold for significant money on the black market, especially to buyers who couldn't pass background checks. The brothers had done their homework. They knew Sarah lived alone, worked irregular hours, and kept firearms in her home. What they hadn't anticipated was that their target was not the helpless victim they imagined her to be. Their research had focused on her schedule and her possessions, not on her training or her preparedness. For the past week, they had been watching Sarah's house, learning her patterns and waiting for the right opportunity. They had seen her come and go, noticed when she forgot to set her alarm system, and observed which windows were easily accessible. Tonight, with the front porch light out and Sarah arriving home later than usual, seemed like the perfect opportunity to strike. Sarah unlocked her front door and stepped inside, immediately sensing that something was wrong. The house felt different somehow. Though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what had changed, her training as a nurse had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was telling her to be alert. She set her purse down on the kitchen counter and walked through the house, turning on lights and checking each room. Everything appeared to be in its proper place. Her television was still mounted on the wall. Her laptop remained on the dining room table, and her jewelry box sat undisturbed on her bedroom dresser. Perhaps she was just being paranoid after the difficult day at work, but as Sarah moved toward her bedroom to change out of her scrubs, she noticed that the window in her spare bedroom was slightly open. She distinctly remembered checking all the windows before leaving for work that morning, and this one had been securely locked. Her heart rate began to increase as she realized that someone had likely been inside her home. Sarah quickly moved to her bedroom closet, where she kept her gun safe hidden behind a row of winter coats. Her hands trembled slightly as she entered the combination, but she managed to open the safe on the first try. The familiar weight of her father's revolver in her hands provided immediate comfort, and she checked to ensure it was loaded with the 6 rounds she always kept ready. Moving carefully through her house, Sarah began to notice other small signs that someone had been inside. A kitchen drawer was not completely closed. The angle of her living room rug was slightly different, and there were muddy footprints on her bathroom tile that she definitely had not made. Someone had clearly searched her house, but they had been careful not to take anything obvious. The realization hit her like a cold wave. They hadn't taken anything because they were coming back. Whoever had been in her house was probably watching right now, waiting for her to let her guard down so they could return and finish whatever they had started. The thought made her stomach turn, but it also made her angry. This was her home, her sanctuary, and no one had the right to violate it. Sarah moved to her front window and carefully peered through the blinds. The street appeared quiet and normal, with the usual collection of parked cars and the soft glow of porch lights from her neighbors' homes. But somewhere out there, she knew, were the people who had invaded her privacy and were likely planning to do much worse. She considered calling the police, but she knew they would want evidence of an actual crime, not just her suspicions about an unlocked window and some muddy footprints. Instead, Sarah decided to prepare for what she sensed was coming. She turned off most of the lights in her house, leaving only a small lamp in the living room to make it appear that she had settled in for the evening. Moving quietly through her darkened home, Sarah positioned herself in her bedroom where she had a clear view of both the front and back entrances. She kept her revolver ready but pointed safely toward the floor, just as her father had taught her years earlier. If someone was planning to return to her house tonight, she would be ready for them. Outside, Marcus and Kevin Thompson were growing impatient. They had expected Sarah to follow her usual routine of showering and going to bed within an hour of arriving home. Instead, lights had been turning on and off throughout the house, and they had seen her silhouette moving from room to room. Something seemed different about tonight, but they had already committed to the plan. The brothers had spent their afternoon break-in searching Sarah's house for her firearms, but they had been unable to locate them. They knew she owned at least one gun, possibly more, and they were determined to find them. Kevin had suggested they wait for a better opportunity, but Marcus was convinced that tonight was their best chance. Marcus carried a small crowbar that he planned to use to force entry through the back door, while Kevin had brought a flashlight and a canvas bag to carry their expected loot. They had both consumed several beers to calm their nerves, which had the unintended effect of making them more reckless and less careful than they should have been. As the hours passed, Sarah's adrenaline began to fade, replaced by exhaustion from her long day at work. She found herself fighting to stay alert, occasionally nodding off despite her best efforts to remain vigilant. It was during one of these brief moments of drowsiness that she heard the sound that changed everything, the soft scraping of metal against the lock on her back door. Sarah's eyes snapped open, and she immediately felt fully awake and alert. The sound came again, more insistent this time, followed by a quiet thud as someone apparently succeeded in forcing the door open. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her hands remained steady as she gripped her revolver and moved silently toward the hallway that led to her kitchen. The next few minutes would test everything her father had taught her about firearm safety, situational awareness, and the responsibility that comes with the power to defend oneself. Sarah had always hoped she would never need to use these skills outside of the controlled environment of the shooting range, but tonight would prove that hope had been naive. Through her kitchen doorway, Sarah could see two dark figures moving cautiously through her home, their flashlight beams dancing across her walls as they searched for valuable items to steal. They were speaking in whispers, but in the quiet of the night, she could make out enough of their conversation to understand their intentions. They were not just looking for random valuables. They were specifically searching for her firearms. The larger of the two intruders was directing the smaller one to check specific areas of the house, places where guns might typically be stored. It became clear to Sarah that these men had done research on her, had watched her house, and had planned this invasion, specifically to steal her legally owned firearms. The violation felt even more personal, knowing that they had targeted her deliberately. As Sarah watched the intruders move through her home with increasing boldness, she realized that she had reached the moment every gun owner hopes never to face, the moment when the choice to use a firearm becomes a question of survival rather than sport or hobby. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that owning a gun meant being prepared to use it, but only when absolutely necessary. The two men were now moving toward the hallway where Sarah waited, their flashlight beams growing brighter as they approached. In just a few more steps, they would discover her position, and she would have to make the most important decision of her life. Sarah took a deep breath, steadied her grip on the revolver, and prepared to defend her home and her life against the two strangers who had chosen to threaten both. The first beam of flashlight cut through the darkness of Sarah's hallway like a sword, followed immediately by the soft shuffle of feet moving across her hardwood floors. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside her bedroom doorway, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the intruders would hear it. The revolver felt heavy in her hands, but familiar and reassuring. "Check the bedroom," whispered the larger figure, his voice carrying a note of authority that suggested he was the leader. "Gun safe's probably in there somewhere. These suburban types always think they're clever hiding it in the bedroom closet." The smaller figure, who Sarah now realized must be quite young based on his voice, responded nervously. "Marcus, man, what if she wakes up? What if she calls the cops?" "She ain't gonna wake up, Kevin. We already checked. She's been working double shifts all week, probably dead asleep by now. And even if she did wake up, what's she gonna do? She's just some nurse lady living alone." Sarah felt a surge of anger at the dismissive tone in Marcus's voice, but she forced herself to remain calm and focused. Her father had always taught her that emotion was the enemy of accuracy, and accuracy was everything when lives were on the line. She took a slow, silent breath and adjusted her grip on the revolver. The beam of Kevin's flashlight appeared first, sweeping across the bedroom doorway just inches from where Sarah stood concealed. She could smell cigarettes and alcohol on the air, confirming that the intruders had been drinking. This could work in her favor, as their reflexes would be slower, but it also made them more unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Kevin stepped into the doorway, his flashlight held high in one hand, while the other gripped what appeared to be a crowbar. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably barely out of his teens, with shaggy hair and nervous energy that made him constantly shift his weight from foot to foot. "I don't see nothing obvious," Kevin whispered back toward his brother. "Maybe we should check the living room again, or the garage." "No, it's here somewhere," Marcus hissed back, his frustration evident. "I heard her talking to that neighbor lady about her daddy's old gun. Said it was a family heirloom or something. People don't keep family guns in the garage." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They had been watching her for longer than she had imagined, listening to her private conversations and learning details about her life. The violation felt even deeper now, knowing that they had been studying her like prey. Kevin took another step into the bedroom, his flashlight beam sweeping across Sarah's dresser and nightstand. In just a few more seconds, he would turn toward the closet area where she was hidden, and the moment of confrontation would arrive whether she was ready or not. "Kevin, hurry up," Marcus called from the kitchen, his voice louder now and less concerned about being quiet. "I found her laptop and some jewelry. Let's grab what we can and get out of here." But Kevin had spotted something that made him pause. Sarah's gun safe, which she had left slightly ajar in her earlier haste to retrieve her revolver, was visible behind the hanging clothes in her closet. The young man's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. "Marcus," Kevin called excitedly, his voice carrying through the house. "I found it. She's got a gun safe right here in the bedroom closet." The sound of Marcus's footsteps moving quickly through the house toward the bedroom filled Sarah with a sense of urgency. In just moments, both intruders would be in the same room with her, and her options would become much more limited. She had to act now, while she still had some element of surprise. "Police! Don't move!" Sarah shouted, stepping out from her hiding place with her revolver raised and pointed toward Kevin. The young man spun around, his eyes wide with shock and fear as he found himself staring down the barrel of the very weapon he had been searching for. Kevin's reaction was immediate and unfortunate. Instead of raising his hands or surrendering, he swung the crowbar in Sarah's direction while simultaneously stumbling backward. The motion was clumsy and uncoordinated, clearly driven by panic rather than any real plan of attack. Sarah had trained for this scenario dozens of times at the shooting range, practicing what instructors called stress shooting, scenarios where targets would appear suddenly, and she would have to make quick decisions about when to fire. But no amount of training could have prepared her for the adrenaline surge of facing a real threat in her own bedroom. "Drop the weapon," Sarah commanded, her voice stronger and more authoritative than she had expected. The countless hours her father had spent teaching her proper gun handling had included extensive instruction on verbal commands and de-escalation techniques. "Get on the ground now." But Kevin was too panicked to comply. He continued swinging the crowbar wildly, his movements becoming more erratic as he tried to back away from Sarah while simultaneously moving toward the bedroom door. The flashlight had fallen from his other hand and was rolling across the floor, creating moving shadows that made the scene even more chaotic. Marcus appeared in the doorway at exactly the wrong moment, just as Kevin was stumbling backward. The two brothers collided, with Kevin's momentum, sending them both tumbling toward the ground. As they fell, Kevin's hand struck the dresser, and the crowbar went flying across the room, clattering against the wall. "What the hell?" Marcus began, but his words were cut short when he saw Sarah standing in the center of the bedroom with her revolver trained on both of them. His expression shifted rapidly from confusion to anger to calculation as he assessed the situation. Unlike his younger brother, Marcus had experience with confrontational situations. He had been arrested multiple times, had faced armed police officers, and had learned to think quickly, under pressure. But he had also never faced an armed civilian who was defending her own home, and he misjudged both Sarah's resolve and her level of training. "Lady, you don't want to do this," Marcus said, slowly getting to his feet while keeping his hands visible. "We're not here to hurt nobody. Just looking for some stuff to pawn, you know. Nothing personal." "You broke into my home," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the chaos of the moment. "You came here specifically to steal my firearms. That makes it very personal." Marcus's eyes narrowed as he realized that Sarah knew more about their intentions than he had expected. His casual approach to defusing the situation wasn't working, and he could see in Sarah's stance and grip that she knew how to use the weapon she was holding. "Look, we can just leave," Marcus continued, taking a small step toward the door. "Nobody has to get hurt here. We'll just walk out, and you'll never see us again." But Sarah had been studying Marcus's body language, and she could see the tension building in his muscles. Her nursing training had taught her to read people, to notice the small signs that indicated when someone was preparing to act. Marcus was preparing to do something, and it wasn't going to be a peaceful retreat. "Both of you, on the ground, hands behind your heads," Sarah commanded. "Now." Kevin, still on the floor from his collision with Marcus, immediately complied, pressing his face against the hardwood and placing his hands behind his head. He was crying now, the reality of the situation finally penetrating his alcohol-clouded judgment. Marcus, however, continued to calculate his options. He could see that Sarah's attention was divided between him and his brother, and he thought he might be able to rush her before she could react. What he didn't realize was that Sarah had positioned herself strategically, with a clear field of fire and enough distance to respond to any sudden movement. "I said get down," Sarah repeated, her voice taking on the tone she used with difficult patients in the emergency room. Firm, uncompromising, and backed by absolute authority. Instead of complying, Marcus made the worst decision of his life. He lunged forward, aiming to grab Sarah's gun hand and wrestle the weapon away from her. He had used this tactic successfully in the past against other victims, but Sarah Martinez was not like anyone he had encountered before. Sarah's response was immediate and decisive. As Marcus moved toward her, she stepped to the side in a motion she had practiced hundreds of times at the shooting range, creating distance while maintaining her sight picture. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Distance is your friend. Space gives you time, and time gives you options." Marcus realized too late that he had misjudged the situation entirely. Sarah wasn't a frightened victim frozen by fear. She was a trained defender who had prepared for exactly this scenario. As his momentum carried him forward, he found himself overextended and off balance, completely committed to an attack that was never going to succeed. The sound of the revolver firing in the enclosed bedroom was deafening, much louder than it ever seemed at the outdoor shooting range. The muzzle flash lit up the room for a brief moment, revealing Marcus's expression of shock and disbelief as the bullet struck him center mass, exactly where Sarah had aimed. Marcus's forward momentum carried him another step before his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the bedroom floor next to his brother. The carefully planned robbery had become a nightmare in the span of just a few seconds, undone by their fundamental miscalculation about their intended victim. Kevin's crying became hysterical, sobbing as he watched his brother fall. "Marcus! Oh God, Marcus!" he screamed, his hands still locked behind his head but his whole body shaking with terror and grief. Sarah maintained her shooting stance, her revolver still pointed toward the two intruders, ready to fire again if necessary. But Marcus wasn't moving, and Kevin showed no signs of being willing or able to continue any kind of resistance. The immediate threat was over, but the situation was far from resolved. "Don't move," Sarah commanded Kevin, her voice now showing the strain of what she had just been forced to do. "Stay exactly where you are." With her free hand, Sarah reached for her phone, which she had left charging on her nightstand. Her movements were careful and deliberate, never taking her eyes or her weapon off the two men on her bedroom floor. Kevin continued sobbing but remained in the position she had ordered. As Sarah dialed 911, she could see that Marcus was unconscious but still breathing. The shot had been well placed, hitting him in the chest but not appearing immediately life-threatening. Her medical training automatically kicked in, and she found herself assessing his condition even as she maintained security over both intruders. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice came through the phone speaker. This is Sarah Martinez at 1247 Desert View Lane, Sarah responded, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. I've shot an intruder in my home. I need police and paramedics immediately. The suspect is unconscious but breathing. I have a second suspect contained. Are you in immediate danger, ma'am? Sarah looked down at Kevin, who was still sobbing into the floor, and at Marcus, who remained unconscious. No. The immediate threat is over. But I need emergency responders here right now. Units are being dispatched to your location. Please stay on the line with me. Are you injured? No, I'm not injured. But the suspects both need medical attention. As Sarah waited for help to arrive, she reflected on how quickly everything had changed. Just minutes earlier, she had been a potential victim of a home invasion. Now she was a defender who had successfully protected her home and her life, but at a cost she had never wanted to pay. The sound of sirens in the distance signaled that her ordeal was nearly over, but Sarah knew that the real challenges were just beginning. She had done everything right, followed her training, and used her firearm exactly as intended, to stop a threat and preserve life. But the weight of having to shoot another human being, even in clear self-defense, was something no amount of training could have prepared her for. Marcus stirred slightly, showing signs of regaining consciousness, which Sarah took as a positive sign for his chances of survival. She had never wanted to hurt anyone, but when faced with the choice between being a victim and being a defender, she had chosen to defend herself with the tools and training she had prepared for exactly this situation. The blue and red lights of the approaching emergency vehicles began reflecting off her bedroom walls, and Sarah knew that the next phase of her ordeal, dealing with police, investigations, and the legal aftermath of a defensive shooting, was about to begin. The first police officer to arrive at Sarah's home was Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, a 15-year veteran who had responded to countless domestic disturbances and break-ins throughout her career. As she approached the house with her weapon drawn, she could hear Sarah's calm voice through the open front door, still talking with the 911 dispatcher and providing updates on the suspect's conditions. "Ma'am, this is the Phoenix Police Department," Sergeant Walsh called out as she reached the front door. "I need you to put down your weapon and come out with your hands visible." Sarah had been expecting this moment and had prepared herself mentally for the standard police procedures that would follow a defensive shooting. She carefully placed her revolver on the dresser, well away from both suspects, and stepped into the hallway with her hands raised above her head. "I'm Sarah Martinez, the homeowner," she called back. "My weapon is secured on the bedroom dresser. I have two suspects contained in my bedroom. One is injured and unconscious. The other is conscious, but not resisting." Sergeant Walsh entered the house cautiously, her training demanding that she treat every scene as potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. When she reached the bedroom doorway and saw the scene inside, Kevin still lying face down with his hands behind his head, sobbing quietly, and Marcus unconscious but breathing steadily, she immediately called for additional units and medical backup. "We're going to need 2 buses here," she radioed, using police code for ambulances. "One suspect, down with gunshot wound to the chest, conscious and breathing. Second suspect, conscious and uninjured but in custody." The paramedics arrived within minutes, their efficient movements and professional demeanor immediately taking control of the medical aspects of the scene. Sarah found herself automatically shifting into her nurse mode, providing clinical information about Marcus's condition and vital signs that she had observed while waiting for help to arrive. "Bullet entry wound center chest. No visible exit wound," Sarah reported to the lead paramedic. "Breathing has remained steady. Pulse was strong when I checked it 5 minutes ago. He's been unconscious since the shooting but showed signs of stirring about 2 minutes ago." The paramedic looked up at Sarah with surprise. "You're medical?" "ICU nurse at Desert Valley Hospital," Sarah replied. 15 years experience. This information immediately changed the dynamic of the scene. The paramedics trusted Sarah's assessment of Marcus's condition, and the police officers recognized that they were dealing with a trained professional who understood both medical procedures and stress management. Detective Raymond Hoskins arrived as the paramedics were loading Marcus into the first ambulance. Hoskins had investigated dozens of home invasion cases and several officer-involved shootings, but civilian defensive shootings were relatively rare in his experience. He approached Sarah with professional courtesy but also with the careful attention to detail that every shooting investigation demanded. "Miss Martinez, I'm Detective Hoskins. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here tonight. Before we begin, I want you to know that you have the right to have an attorney present during questioning." Sarah nodded. "I understand, Detective. I'm willing to answer your questions. I have nothing to hide." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah recounted the events of the evening in careful detail. Detective Hoskins was impressed by her clear recollection and her understanding of the legal principles surrounding self-defense. It was obvious that Sarah had thought carefully about these issues long before she was ever forced to face them. "Walk me through your decision-making process when the suspect charged at you," Detective Hoskins asked. Sarah took a moment to collect her thoughts before responding. "He had already demonstrated that he was willing to use violence by swinging the crowbar at me. When I ordered him to get on the ground, he instead chose to attack. At that point, I believed he intended to disarm me and potentially use my own weapon against me. I felt I had no choice but to stop the threat." Detective Hoskins nodded, making notes in his investigation file. Sarah's account was consistent with the physical evidence at the scene, the 911 recording, and Kevin's tearful confession about their plans to steal firearms and sell them illegally. Meanwhile, at Desert Valley Hospital, Marcus Thompson was undergoing emergency surgery to repair the damage caused by Sarah's well-placed shot. The bullet had struck him in the upper right chest, missing his heart and major blood vessels but causing significant trauma to his lung and ribs. The surgeon later told Detective Hoskins that Marcus was extremely fortunate. A few inches in any direction and the wound would have been fatal. Kevin Thompson found himself in a holding cell at the Phoenix Police Department, facing charges of burglary, conspiracy to commit armed robbery, and illegal weapons trafficking. His initial bravado had completely disappeared, replaced by the terrified realization that his criminal career had ended before it really began. During his interview with Detective Hoskins, Kevin provided detailed information about how he and Marcus had planned the break-in and their intention to steal Sarah's firearms. "We heard her talking to her neighbor about her dad's old gun collection," Kevin admitted through his tears. "Marcus said guns were easy money, especially if they were antiques or something. We didn't think she'd actually use them. We thought they'd just be locked up somewhere safe." This statement became a crucial piece of evidence in the investigation, clearly establishing that the Thompson brothers had targeted Sarah specifically for her firearms and had planned the crime in advance. It also demonstrated their fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be a responsible gun owner. 3 days after the shooting, Detective Hoskins presented his findings to the Maricopa County District Attorney's Office. The evidence clearly supported Sarah's account of the incident and established that she had acted in lawful self-defense. The DA's office announced that no charges would be filed against Sarah Martinez, and praised her for her restraint and proper use of force in a dangerous situation. Miss Martinez faced every gun owner's worst nightmare, District Attorney Patricia Coleman said during a press conference. She was forced to choose between being a victim and defending herself. She made the right choice, and she did it by the book. This case serves as an example of why proper training and responsible gun ownership are so important. The local news media picked up the story, and Sarah found herself reluctantly in the spotlight as an example of successful armed self-defense. Gun rights advocates praised her actions, while gun control advocates used the incident to argue for better background checks that might have prevented the Thompson brothers from attempting to acquire firearms illegally. Sarah herself tried to stay out of the public debate, focusing instead on returning to her normal life and processing the emotional impact of what she had been forced to do. The hospital administration granted her 2 weeks of administrative leave to deal with the aftermath of the shooting, but Sarah found that staying busy with work actually helped her cope with the stress. Marcus Thompson survived his surgery and eventually made a full recovery, though he would carry physical reminders of that night for the rest of his life. During his hospital stay, he had plenty of time to think about the choices that had led him to Sarah's bedroom floor. When Detective Hoskins interviewed him weeks later, Marcus expressed genuine remorse for what he had put Sarah through. "I never thought about what it would be like for her," Marcus said from his hospital bed. "I just saw guns and money, you know. I didn't think about how she'd feel having strangers break into her house. I didn't think about how scared she must have been." Marcus eventually pleaded guilty to burglary, conspiracy, and weapons trafficking charges. His lawyer argued for leniency based on his cooperation with the investigation and his expressed remorse. But the judge was unsympathetic to someone who had specifically targeted a law-abiding citizen's firearms. "Mr. Thompson, you and your brother made a conscious decision to invade Miss Martinez's home and steal her legally owned firearms," Judge Margaret Hartley said during sentencing. "Your actions endangered her life and forced her to make a choice no one should have to make. The sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the trauma you caused." Marcus received 8 years in state prison, while Kevin, as a first-time offender who had cooperated fully with investigators, received 3 years with the possibility of parole after 18 months. For Sarah, the legal resolution of the case brought some closure, but the emotional impact of the shooting continued to affect her daily life. She began seeing a counselor who specialized in helping people cope with the aftermath of violent encounters. Through therapy, Sarah learned that her feelings of guilt and sadness about hurting another person were normal and healthy, even when her actions had been completely justified. "You saved your own life that night," her counselor, Dr. Patricia Reeves, explained during one of their sessions. "But taking a life or seriously injuring someone, even in self-defense, creates trauma that needs to be processed. It's a sign of your humanity that this has affected you so deeply." Sarah also found support from other women who had been forced to defend themselves with firearms. Through a local support group, she met others who understood the unique emotional challenges that come with using deadly force in self-defense. These connections helped her realize that she was not alone in her experience. 6 months after the shooting, Sarah made some changes to her home security that she hoped would prevent future incidents. She installed a comprehensive alarm system with cameras covering all entrances, improved her exterior lighting, and joined a neighborhood watch program that helped residents look out for each other. But the most significant change was Sarah's decision to become an instructor at the local shooting range, teaching firearms safety and self-defense courses specifically designed for women. Her experience had given her unique insights into the mental and emotional preparation that responsible gun ownership requires. "People think that buying a gun makes you safe," Sarah told her first class of students. "But owning a firearm is just the beginning. You have to be prepared mentally and emotionally for the possibility that you might have to use it, and you have to accept that using it will change you, even when you do everything right." Sarah's classes quickly gained a reputation for their thorough approach to both the technical and psychological aspects of armed self-defense. Her students appreciated learning from someone who had actually faced the situation they were preparing for, rather than just talking about it hypothetically. Marcus Thompson's mother, Dorothy, surprised everyone by reaching out to Sarah through a victim services coordinator about 6 months after the incident. Dorothy wanted to apologize for her son's actions and to thank Sarah for not taking his life when she could have. "I raised him better than this," Dorothy said during their brief meeting at a neutral location arranged by the coordinator. "I don't know where I went wrong, but I'm grateful that you showed restraint that night. Marcus is getting the help he needs in prison, and maybe this will be the wake-up call that changes his life." The meeting was emotional for both women, but it helped Sarah feel a sense of closure about the incident. She was able to see Marcus not just as a criminal who had threatened her, but as someone's son who had made terrible choices but might still have a chance to change his life. A year after the shooting, Sarah received a letter from Kevin Thompson, written from the minimum security facility where he was serving his sentence. In the letter, Kevin expressed his remorse and described how the incident had forced him to completely reevaluate his life choices. "I want you to know that what happened that night wasn't your fault," Kevin wrote. "Me and Marcus made every bad choice that led to that bedroom. You just protected yourself like any person has the right to do. I'm getting my GED in here and planning to go to community college when I get out. I want to make something positive out of my life instead of just taking things from other people." Sarah chose to respond to Kevin's letter, encouraging his efforts to educate himself and change his life. She never forgot what he and his brother had put her through, but she also recognized that Kevin was still young enough to learn from his mistakes and become a productive member of society. The incident became a case study in several criminal justice and firearms training programs, cited as an example of how proper preparation, training, and mental readiness can help law-abiding citizens successfully defend themselves when faced with violent crime. Sarah occasionally spoke at these programs, sharing her experience and emphasizing the importance of understanding both the legal and emotional consequences of armed self-defense. 2 years after the shooting, Sarah still lived in the same house, Though she had made it much more secure, she continued working as a nurse, teaching self-defense classes, and advocating for responsible gun ownership. The experience had changed her, but it had also reinforced her belief that people have both the right and the responsibility to protect themselves and their homes. "I never wanted to shoot anyone," Sarah reflected during an interview for a documentary about defensive gun use. "But when someone breaks into your home and threatens your life, you realize that all the philosophical debates about violence become very simple, very quickly. You can be a victim, or you can be a survivor. I chose to survive." The story of Sarah Martinez and the Thompson brothers serves as a powerful reminder that the decision to own firearms for protection comes with serious responsibilities and potential consequences. It also demonstrates that when properly trained and mentally prepared individuals are forced to defend themselves, they can successfully protect their lives and property while minimizing harm to their attackers. For Sarah, the incident proved that her father's teachings about firearms responsibility, her own commitment to training and preparation, and her professional medical background had all combined to help her survive a situation that could have ended tragically. She had faced every gun owner's greatest fear and greatest responsibility, and she had handled both with the skill and judgment that saved her life while preserving the possibility of redemption for those who had threatened it.